Welcome to the Reginald Bumgardner Show. Bonsai gardening for cross-dressing Armenian oboist. But since Reginald, since Father Bumgardner couldn't be here tonight, we're just going with our normal, or should I say, our more normal programming. That didn't get on tape, did it? No, back to sincere. Not totally unrelated. Not to that, to some of the stuff we've been talking about. Would you like to play again that kind of little subversive game that some of you seem to enjoy, pulling out ordinarily well-known, stated truisms, little pieces of conventional wisdom and info, that, it just so happens from a more subversive view, that just sort of accidentally, without being noticed of course, but kind of accidentally actually reflect something of a more explosive, startling insight. And there's a good old one that everyone, including the good Father, were he here, has heard, that goes like this, quote, "If it ain't one thing, it's another." It's too bad that we don't have the authors, just as a sidebar, of these kinds of old statements, that maybe we could pick up a few bucks by reviving these dead mothers. But that's said so often no one notices. But it is, from a very particular way, a startling kind of reflection of the very thing that we were talking about, I said recently, last time we were doing this show. If it ain't one thing, it's another. Now, I would either submit or agree, if you submitted, that ordinary people would use that having to do with behavior, accidents, fate, chance, car running over your toe again. But that always comes at a later date, whether it be a split second or whether it be eons, after the unstated energy background, or background energy, that made man eventually say not only this, but everything else, including waiter. There was some validity to it somewhere, some energy validity. So if it ain't one thing, it's another. Now consider, from a very subversive way, what this is noting to a kind of new intellect is the inescapable neural process whereby one idea is always dominating another, and if it is not, then some other idea is dominating it. The very thing we were talking about last time, except here it is. And I started to say, least you thought that some of the verbalization last time got too obtuse, and I tried to simplify it. Don't think that we oversimplified it. That is exactly what, if it ain't one thing, it's another. Except assume, plug in thing instead of being some form of behavior, some tangible, observable manifestation out there, the thoughts. In you, the thought tango that runs the secondary world. What it is really signifying, from a more complex view, is that they're right if we were just like some people aspire to be, if you were just an Arkansas truck driver. And so, well, if it ain't one thing, it's another. Somebody just backed into my truck when I was there in the coffee shop. And so you can say that life itself, at that level, it is a matter of, if it ain't one thing, it's another. If some damn drunk doesn't run over my little toe of my right foot again, I figure it's a good day, and what happens? Somebody steps on my left toe. Look at it another way. It is just as inescapable. And once you see the reality, it is more inescapable, because insofar as what would seem to be the important manifestations out here, enough that make men take note of it, some days apparently are somewhat insignificant, that you can't really remember anything astoundingly interesting that happened yesterday. Nobody ran over your foot yesterday. Just kind of a no-no day. But An ordinary intellect may say that in his secondary world, in his factual world, there may not have been anything of any great importance happen yesterday, and I am being somewhat charitable in that because some people can't remember anything interesting that happened last decade in their mind. But regardless of their individual limitation, across the whole spectrum of humanity, there is something happening interesting at every given moment. Either that, or it's all over. And if you'll look around, if you are, well, they call it conscious enough to look around, you'll notice it is not all over, or else you're having one of the world's great prolonged dreams. At the three-dimensional level, it is not all over. So there is something going on interesting, whether it be by your definition, individual or not. It is interesting on this definition, on this operational definition level. It is alive. So it is interesting. And it is alive on this basis and this basis only, that at any given moment, one idea is dominating over its apparent opposite. Wherever you turn, wherever any group of people, if we took a whole group, a whole city, some whole segment on this planet, wherever that group or that person even looks, whatever seems to be occupying their mind at that moment, one idea is dominating over its apparent opposite. That is, if it ain't one thing, it's another. Because it is true. If it were not this idea, whatever it is, and it's of no consequence once you get past the dressing on it and you get back to the energy. Because if it was not this idea, whatever idea that is, dominating another one, it would be some other idea dominating it. Thus you have a more uptown, sophisticated version of that initially sounding, perhaps, bucolic idea of, well, if it ain't one thing, it's another. That is extremely sophisticated. Once you begin to see such as that, it is beyond the actual intellectual grasp, the intellectual patina of scientific, subatomic theories and ideas. I mean, you got it wrapped up. Of course, we've done that before. It's just that the Planck Institute has yet to contact me and give me the grant I was hoping for. Don't write me from the Institute. I don't want no damn grant. If it ain't one thing, it's another. Without any sort of I'll assume you won't believe there's any sort of psychological remedial inference here, that if you realize that that is the nature of the mind, at the ordinary level, that is the absolute inescapable movement of the energy that makes you think, no matter what you think, no matter who you are, no matter where you live, that if it ain't one thing, it's another. That is, if I wasn't thinking this, I'd be thinking something else. It's of no consequence at any ordinary level. But you realize at an individual level, which we're playing with reality, if you were at an individual level enough to hear this, and you still simultaneously had psychological problems, save yourself a bunch of money. There it is. See, the ordinary world cannot look at it this way, but part of religion, going to seek a rabbi's advice, going to confession, going to an analyst. Do you understand that part of that, this is so blatant, I hate to say it, because even Kyroot suggests that blatantness should not be put in front of the blatantly blind. I do not know what that means, but Kyroot said that, and I felt, who am I to question? Do you understand that part of all the things I mentioned, analysis, for instance, part of it is based upon, and what seems to be the enjoyable, the pleasurable, the profitable aspects, according to many people, is that it fits into, hey, if it ain't one thing, it's another. I guess you're telling me I should forget about the Easter Bunny too. And it was you people that got me off of Santa Claus. Get a stamp. What if you got, I'll make it simple. man with a terrible phobia, a man with great fears, a man with raging, at least, pretty irritating thoughts. Look at all that's involved. I won't even lead up to it with all of trying to find the right one and going through the scheduling, how to pay for it. But just look to fall in for your 50 minutes with a psychiatrist at the time you're there. If it ain't one thing, it's another. You don't like that? Or you go into a priest, those of you that are Jewish and go to confession, you go into a priest, you go there in the booth, and you've got these terrible things that you remember that you did. And you keep, you have to shave your hand or I don't know what. And you have to go in. But now you've got these terrible, let's say that you're more Catholic or Jewish or religious than you are psychologically inclined or psychiatrically attracted. And so you can talk, you can confess, you can tell it, you can wonder what he thinks. Can you smell the disgust through the curtain or whatever they use? Can you hear him trying to choke back going to your confession? But you understand if it ain't one thing, it's another. And part of this, part of going to an analyst, part of talking to other people about, I've been having these terrible nightmares. I'm afraid I'm going to kill my husband. Well, here, hon, let's have a cup of coffee and talk about it. Well, I should, but you understand? If it ain't one thing, it's another. Are some of you going to be so cheap in your thinking, if not your fiscal affairs, that you would say that it's not worth whatever they get nowadays? $200 an hour, that you're having these terrible daydreams, that you're afraid that, yes, you are beginning to look more and more like Nancy Reagan or somebody. Especially you women. I mean, men. If you're a Republican, don't write me. It's not worth $200 an hour to go somewhere and to get that off your mind for 50 minutes, professionally known as an hour, which is only 50 minutes. It only costs you $200 because look at all the things. You can wonder, what does the psychiatrist think of you? And I didn't go through all the rest, but it's really, you get more than your 50 minutes worth. Because $200 an hour, let's assume, is not chump change to you, so you have to worry. You have to worry all week about getting there, how you going to pay for it. Then you get there and you sit and he doesn't talk and you think, I'm paying $200 an hour to this sucker for this. And you think, I wonder, a friend of mine says she found a guy that only charges $50 an hour. Or, a guy that gives frequent, confession coupons or bonuses. You're apparently paying $200 for some sort of, psychiatric hocus pocus instead of some Catholic hocus pocus. All that doesn't matter. Don't look at that as being an attack. Contraire, Pierre. Instead of you thinking it's an attack, I'm trying to get you to see all these dirty jobs in life. That's why we have institutions. That when it just gets really dirty, I mean really dirty, well, I'm not going to say shitty again. Who does life give it to? Normally, religion. Religion's got every dirty job that ever came down the historical pipe. Nowadays, psychiatrists, psychologists, talk show hosts, they're beginning to have to shoulder more and more of the burden. But rather than you laugh, or rather you being in favor of these guys, these turncoats, they're psychiatrists now, that once I assume they can't charge enough, and they write a book exposing their own profession. Rather than you think, yeah, that's true, rather than them trying to show statistically, or worse than that some of these psychiatrists try to, God forbid, use common sense and prove that psychiatry doesn't do anything. Don't you fall for that. No. Why else would reasonable people, and it's the more educated, go and pay $200 an hour to go to a psychiatrist? So don't you laugh. No. Those who are less educated are the ones that go see Oral Roberts or go to a confession and, light a candle, throw in 50 cents. The church will still let you get by with that crap. Psychiatrists, try to hand him 50 cents and say, this is for you, my good man. You will not be invited back. But it's, in a sense, it is the institutions, as part of their job, is to take the crummiest jobs. And for those of you watching via the bridge work in your grandmother's mouth, one more time, this is not an attack. We're not making fun of all that. I'm trying to get you to look at it another way. that the institutions, part of their job is for you to get your money's worth in life. Part of their job is, on a broader basis, to make sure that if it ain't one thing, it's another. So if you're standing around and you're wired up and life is busy, we're not apologizing for life. I'm not taking up for it as if I could, but just assume life's busy. Look how busy you are, okay? Then think how busy life is. Didn't get much reaction. Maybe it wasn't worded real good, but the Kyroot tonight about this God that, everybody keeps, I'm sure you can imagine, not that you ever would play any part in it, but all of his creatures, this one reality is God, all of his little creatures, they're all the time pleading and asking, to straighten out something. Well, constantly. Why else you got a God? And to cut down on some of the repetition and some of the useless, supplications are not going to go anywhere, he had this sign posted everywhere in that reality that creatures would go and supposedly, so they could come into a house of worship or whatever they call it and talk to him. He just put up a sign. Maybe Kyroot didn't make it plain enough that kind of beforehand. He didn't say he wouldn't listen to any more pleas and, straighten us out and whines. It was just like, before you do it, let me remind you, whatever you're going to say, he just put up a sign that they were supposed to read before they started again that said, in other words, the answer to everything was, hey, fair is fair. I guess that's why Kyroot tells me not to try and interpret him. Part of the job of institutions, in a sense, is, they'll probably get some kind of chuckle, but it's really not funny. That's not the point. Part of the job of institutions, when I said to get your money's worth out of life, is that let's say that you're wired up in such a way that you're staying around and these thoughts come through you that you do not like. You are not satisfied with some observable to you, meaningful, sizable segment of your intellectual life. And so you seek out religion or psychiatry. Part of the job of psychiatry as an institution, of religion as an institution, of friendship, social friendship as an institution, part of the job is, before you laugh again at $200 an hour or scoff, is that you can think about that instead of what you're thinking about. So don't take the idea, wait a minute, religion's a farce. Nobody's ever seen God or whatever religion or Allah. They don't know that God cares about you. You just point out life's busy. You call it life, but we don't know that God cares. And we don't know that psychiatrists know any more than we do. I've seen statistics that show that the drug addiction rate of psychiatrists is even more than backhoe operators and attorneys, which gives you some pause to worry about having somebody with a college education try and work on your septic tank. But rather than laugh, do you understand that part of it? We've got to go away from this. I skated all around the edges because if you just say it outright, it almost sounds as a joke. And if you're really crude and ordinary, it would just sound like a smart-ass joke. It sounds like cynicism. In the factual world, since it has to define what it's doing anyway, and it's all self-referral, then if we take any area, psychiatry, the institution of psychiatry, the active profession of psychiatry of attempting to treat people in whatever manner. Well, let's leave out drugs for a second, but to treat people in a non-pharmaceutical manner for their ipse dixit claims of being intellectually disturbed. That somebody says, I don't like the way I think, I'm bothered, I'm upset, I'm about to go crazy. The whole spectrum. Then psychiatry look at it as being the institution that is actively charged with trying to help this. Now, the easy way to say it is forget any ideas about, wait a minute, I can dissect what psychiatry says it's doing and show that it's folly. But if you start that, then if you had any reason, if you were just, that is, if you could think, then you would have to say, wait a minute, then I got to dissect the way people think, which is the same thing as dissecting the institution of psychiatry. There is no way to say psychiatry doesn't work. No valuable way. There is no profitable manner to approach an attack on religion. Because if somebody says, I'm having terrible thoughts, and the guy says, well, I don't know why you're telling me here on the street, stranger, but it so happens I'm a psychiatrist. If you're that disturbed, come over here a second. My bus won't be here for a second. Tell me about it. And so the guy stands there, and he tells about it. Now, you could be part of life's body if you're ordinary, and you're a cynic in an alley. A critic walking by, and you could go, boy, is that silly. Boy, is that ridiculous, because under the best conditions, if they were in the guy's office in that expensive building down the street, and if he was paying big money, it still wouldn't amount to squat. And here this fraud, this psychiatrist is saying, hey, I got a couple of minutes. Go here and tell me your problems. Maybe I can help. He can't help. Nobody can help. Blah, 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 blah. Right quick. Here's the crude part I said. I really spent some time instead of just throwing it on you. The guy says, well, all right, let me talk to you. If you are a psychiatrist, maybe he's not even, but he says he is. And the guy says, well, let me tell you. For 2 or 3 minutes, he's thinking about something else rather than whatever it is driving him nuts, as he put it. That's not worth anything. Now, boy, it's easy enough. One more time I'll point out. I just don't want you to miss the crudeness of it, the plainness of it. There is no manner to profitably attack the institutions in life that purport to offer some surcease from man's factual problems, from his intellectual melees, all the way from being neurotic to being psychotic, to even threatening to enter law school or something. Because if it ain't one thing, it's another. And so you can think the devil, if you're religious, evil spirits have my mind. They make me think extremely naughty thoughts. And it's about to drive me bonkers. And you can go into a priest, to some religion. And again, you're the outside critic hanging around the bushes thinking, here it is. More of that insanity, more of religion, keeping man back. The guy goes in, and he says, is there a priest available? Can somebody talk to me? And it just so happens maybe that is where Father Bumgardner is. And he says, well, yes, my son, come here. Tell me what it is. Sit down and relax. And he tells him. Now, you could be hanging around if you were part of life's ordinary body and saying, we have got to get past this. This is a fraud. I don't know whether the priest knows what useless information, whether he's aware of how he is misdirecting someone's thoughts, or whether he too is victim of this same kind of conspiracy, yammer, yammer, yammer. Hold up, Bunky. The guy says, he's saying, we're not questioning this, another guy that could have been you. He's saying, I'm having these terrible thoughts and they're driving me nuts. Will you talk to me? And the guy says, yes, sit down. Sit down. Take your time. Tell me what it is. And the guy whines, cries, does whatever. He tells the guy, if it ain't one thing, it's another. So he's thinking about this. And if you ask him later, did you feel better? When he comes out, he may say, well, I did for a while. And you might even say, well, are you a Catholic? No, I'm not a Catholic. Are you religious? No, I'm not religious. Do you even believe in God? I'm not even sure. But you said, would you feel better? And he said, well, yeah, I do. Of course, that can happen just with going and talking to your mama or your sister or somebody down the street. But that does not get the kind of criticism. It does not, which makes it harder to see, is why I didn't use the more everyday examples. But if you drag it out into what appears to be the more three-dimensional landscape of man's institutions, because they're always sitting ducks for somebody to point. If it ain't one thing, it's another. And it's the kind of history you don't like, didn't happen, then something else would have happened. I'm not saying better or worse. And forget history. Oh, wait a minute. The areas in which I'm interested, I mean really interested. I'm being ordinary now. In those areas, I have given so much thought, I have given so much study and reflection, and I am so convinced of the propriety of my conclusions that I am astounded that any other right-thinking human could disagree. Well, you may be an expert in some field, but you're a poster child for the history of stupidity. That is, the limits of three-dimensional thinking. You cannot go any further, and you do not understand any more than polarized energy in a three-dimensional landscape will allow. And to say, well, wait a minute, there's got to be true ideas and false ideas. There's no doubt about that. But if you're going to think beyond the old limit, you've got to understand that those are very poor synonyms. Or as another Kyroot used tonight, that there is a legend in one reality that says that the downfall of the intellectual life of their creatures, this is another reality now, we're not talking about here, that the downfall was heralded by the discovery of synonyms. It's a frightening thought. Much more frightening than the fact of Oral Roberts wearing glasses. I know that scared a lot of you. I had to point that out, but this is much more frightening. But rather than it being, which it is true at that childish or that three-dimensional level, that yes, there does have to be true ideas and false ideas. There have to be better things to think about. And tonight I was trying to use a more social example as opposed to science, that not just that they're right ideas, that 2 and 2 is 4, etc., but in the social world that there are ideas that are more profitable to the individual for to think about, because something is wrong if you're going around thinking how much you hate your mother, or that you keep thinking you have pictures of you killing your mate, or doing some kind of social damage, doing something completely uncivil. That is not a different scenario. It is not a different intellectual area than the question of 2 and 2 equals 4, which is true, and 2 and 2 equals 5 is untrue. Then it's also true at the ordinary level that anybody, not according to me, not according to you, if you're any good at this, if somebody says, I have thoughts I don't like. Now, I picked out obvious ones for ordinary examples of somebody who says, well, I have thoughts I don't like. Well, what are they, sir? I imagine I'm killing my mother. Oh, that's bad. I agree with you. It may not be that. The point is, he says it is. That is, that outlet, that hole in the finger, the rubber in the finger of the rubber glove of life that is being mashed, and it comes out, no offense to you people who believe, you creationists and you Baptists, it comes out, the moosh comes out as humanity, intellectual humanity. And so this coming out, whoever it is, a little finger over here, it's a hole in the finger, another finger of the glove. You're over here on one finger, and somebody says, I have terrible thoughts. They're driving me crazy. And you ask, well, what are they? And the person says, I keep imagining that the Lakers will never win another, there'll never be another playoff. Now, so you laughed. It just shows how much some of you people appreciate the spiritual values inherent in hoopball. But so you think, well, that's not as important. I just use that. That's not as important as the guy who says, my mind's going crazy because I believe that plumbing talks to me, especially in public places. Or that I'm afraid, I keep thinking, I hate my mother, I hate my mother. That doesn't matter. It's not that institutionally or some group would say, well, now that does deserve attention. You should go to a psychiatrist, or you should seek the help of a priest or somebody. It doesn't matter. If the person says, I do not like what I'm thinking, I worry about the history, the future of the Lakers. Don't laugh. If the person says, I don't like that. Now, he may not, we'll assume that he's not any stranger than that, where he says, I need psychiatric help. I need to go and have some quality time with a sports writer. I don't know. It's simply, he says, I do not like what I think. Now, I've tried to drag it out enough that we're getting close that you can point your own finger at yourself, and you may have never been on the verge of being clinically diagnosed, or even your self-diagnosis of being in need of psychiatric care, but people do not like what they think, or else you wouldn't be thinking. Yeah. Because half of your mind, remember, is composed of that which you don't believe, which you don't think, in a sense, not subconsciously, but half of everything you know is composed of what you don't know. Half of everything you know is true is composed of what is not true. It's why you can compare the two, and it seems to stand out in your three-dimensional neural landscape. So everyone, at just that ordinary degree, does not like, to some degree, what they think. Now back to, for those of you who think that we have changed from religion to the NBA, if it ain't one thing, it's another. What would you call, what would be another description then of the intellectual progress, the apparent intellectual progress of three-dimensional man? If it ain't one thing, it's another. That's it. Well, that's one. But within a three-dimensional context, we could go back to playing. Somebody's going to have to find me the name of those toys if they still make them. You laugh, I assume you've seen them. Little wooden figures on one little small dial that runs through it with the little legs, and you put it on an incline or a decline, and the figure just, through the force of gravity, does this. I don't mean that life is, of course, devolving, but when you look, at the progress of humanity, the movement of humanity, if it ain't one thing, it's another. That is, if it ain't the left foot, it's the right foot. And just to show you the complexity that is possible in a three-dimensional context. If it ain't the left foot, it's the right foot. You can look at that as corollary or as theorem 1. But if it ain't the left foot, it's the right. But number 2. But if it's not the right foot, then it's the left. I mean, what in a zoot-suited Zeus's name would you have? What would you ask for in the way of justice and efficiency? If it ain't one thing, it's another. If any of you are crude enough and dumb enough, well, to be crude and sarcastic and hear all this in one ear, then you could say, well, wait a minute. All that's saying is, well, if it ain't the truth, it's error. Now, I didn't say that. I said if you were dumb enough, you could say that. I will not try and weasel out. I will not even try and ferret out. Because at a closer to a 3D level, that would not be a totally inoperative statement. Yes, if it's not truth, it's error. Okay. I ask you then, what do you call the progress, the apparent movement and progress of man? Yeah, but that's not just replacing one thing with another. Oh. Notice I had the decency not to say, prove it. Did you have the decency on your own to right quick realize it can't be proven? Which is why you can say it. Because if you can't prove something in the 3D world, you can always say it. Because if it can't be proven, then it cannot be unproven. Sometimes known as disproven. And you're back to where the song started. If it ain't one thing, it's another. Wait a minute, I can say this, I can say this. That the progress of man is absolutely dependent upon, not some kind of tricky wordplay like some shyster like you's trying to pull. It's dependent upon there at times being error, and then it gets replaced with less error. And hopefully the truth are getting closer and closer. That's progress. And don't try and fool me. Don't just say if it's one thing, if it's not one thing, it's another. That cannot be disproven. But nothing in the factual world. Remember the factual version, the polarized version, in a 3D world of whatever the factual information is. One of them is always, whatever the fact is at any particular time, whatever the idea is always at the expense of another. If something's true, it's at the expense of something else being false. So then to say, well, wait a minute, this is true. This is the proper, civil, Christian, decent, humane, scientifically correct, politically correct, economically correct. This is, in this particular case, this idea is the proper one. The more truthful one, the better one, the best one. And if you say prove it, it cannot be proven. That's when it is correct and operationally proper in a 3D world, because it cannot be proven. If it could be proven, it would be outside the grasp of polarized energy. If it could be proven, no one would have thought of it. If it could be proven, there'd be no question. I don't mean not this kind of stuff about self-evident truth. I know that's been thrown around throughout history, normally in religious contexts, that a priest or somebody else with their job on the line. Just a joke. That life will make people in those contexts stand up and say, wait a minute, you can debate science, you can debate particle physics, you can debate even mathematics, all you want to, but there are at least a few, or shall I say one. There is at least one self-evident truth in this universe. Okay? That there is a God. Now, that'll stop a lot of people. A lot of people under certain contexts will not get up and make, as they call in the field of cosmology, they will not stand up and make a ruckus about that. Many people will intellectually kind of get put on hold. But again, no attack on religion, but if there is anything in the world that is not self-evident, in other words, if there's anything that cannot be proven by any means whatsoever, is there is a force outside of all the forces that we know. I mean, if there's anything that cannot be proven, that would be the primo example. But notice the way in which life efficiently and beautifully works is that as normally, as I was saying, it has been used as being just the opposite. The primo example that there is at least one self-evident, absolutely unconditional, assured reality or fact. And some scientists, not that they're absolutely incapable of having any crossover information, but I was going to say even people who would say, well, I only believe in science, or science is my God. And you say, well, in your field, are there any certainties? Well, certainly not. I mean, that's not what science is about. We keep trying to strive for it. But then those same kind of people, just the way life is wired up, they're very inclined to be at least slowed down for a second if you say, well, now wait, my brother says that there is, beyond science and all the doubts about this and that there is at least one self-evident, absolutely inconvertible, indisputable truth, and I repeat, it has always come out historically as some kind of, in a religious context, like life has meaning, or that we came from somewhere. You know, if the idea, if the statement, well, God created us, if that seems to kind of going down hard with folks, then sometimes they'll say, well, we didn't come from nothing. And I'll get people to stop. Because that one sounds, well, hey, but think about it again. That contrary to that being some, or it being the one unconditional, indisputable, incontrovertible, inescapable, self-evident truth, rather than that, you couldn't make up a better example of something that it cannot be proven. Now, of course, then they got the way out of that. They holler faith, which is not the point. It's the way that life can use, if it ain't one thing, it's another, because in life, at the ordinary level, the factual version of secondary energy running the mind in a 3D world, to say that anything is true, the more it would seem to be true in that context, the less it is true. It's a good thing we're out of time because I can't prove that. I was going to try to get you to see one more time. Trying to think of a sneaky way to get you up so that you bite your own ass before you run out of tape. Right quick, of course, as always, I will make a hand gesture. No. It's think that we're not talking about the institution, we're not talking about religion, psychiatry, we're not talking about other people. We're talking about the world as it is, of any consequence to a would-be revolutionist here. At the ordinary level, the thoughts that would seem to be the most indisputable, the most self-evident, whether you ever use these descriptions or not, those that would seem to be, whether you particularly like them, you might say, well, I don't really like, that must be true, but I don't like it in some ways. Those are the very things that if you look at from a more, if you can do it, more complex view, if you can move it all away from the old established neural building site, they are the very ones that they're from another view, not the ordinary view, but from another view, they're the ones that absolutely collapse. They are the living examples of, if it ain't one thing, it's another. Because at first you say, wait a minute, there's a few things, or at least one or two things that I know for certain. I mean, I just believe this all my heart and soul. I can't get away from it. It's just something in the cosmos, the energy, the elements from the heavens and the stars themselves are somewhere in my soul, and the messages run through the genetics of the universe, and it tells me such and such is true. There is the greatest example, if you can see it, of if it ain't one thing, it's another. Because that very thing, all you got to do, if you can move just a little bit away from that old building site, that is the very thing that is the least worthy, very relatively speaking, because it's all slop once you get away from it. But those are the very things that's the least possible to find any proof. And you must know, with one closing hand gesture, that I don't mean proof in the ordinary sense, and we're not trying to disprove religion or if there's a God. It's got nothing to do with that. It's that the very energy that runs the human mind, that runs everything else, but it ends up running here, and the very ones without any kind of subversive ability to analyze in the way in which we've been talking about it, the very things that would seem to be, quote, self-evident, are contraire. Ooh, contraire, may I say. And it's so beautiful, though. It is efficiency on Zeus's hoof. It is efficiency and justice on a rocket sled. To take the thing that from one view, to say, well, the greatest thing historically, I'm not particularly religious as this ordinary guy, but historically, there's got to be some religious, the greatest commonly held belief all across this planet, cutting across all religious, nationalistic bounds, is that there's got to be a God. I mean, that's one thing scientists, atheists, well, all right, scientists, even attorneys and accountants and cab drivers, I mean, all over throughout history, people say there's got to be a God. And so you think, well, if there's anything even comes close to being a self-evident, solid, incontrovertible truth, it's that. Except from another view, that's the worst example you could pick out. Since we're out of tape, we're out of tape. If you'll tune in next time, we hope that Father Bumgardner will be feeling better then. Until then, I was going to say adios in Latin, but are we faded out yet? Can I quit looking serious? Are we off the air?